taken from sample TABE. So you can see the question asks you read the sentence from paragraph 4 and then asks you which key idea does the sentence support. And it gives you 4 choices there. You pick the answer you think is best. That's how selected response works. Here's a sample from the language test. It gives you a sentence: because I wanted to adopt a healthier lifestyle, I decided to abstain from fast foods and sugary soft drinks. I looked and felt better after eliminating them from my diet. What does the word abstain mean as it's used in the first sentence? And again, you pick from 4 choices. You choose the answer you feel is best reflective of the meaning of abstain as it's used there. And then finally, an example from the math sample test. The price of apples at 3 different stores is shown below. Which of these is a true statement? And you pick the one that you think is true based on the information you've been given. So those are the kinds of questions that I think most of us have come to expect from a standardized test, right? You get those multiple choice questions, you pick the best answer, you move on to the next question. But you can see we've got a pretty extensive list here, right? The next one is gridded response items, and these are only found on the math test. These types of questions ask the student to determine an answer and to mark that answer on a grid. So here's an example, again, from the math sample test. There are no answers from which the student can choose. The student has to solve the problem and then enter their answer on the grid. So they solve this problem, and then they, on this example, it's actually the paper pencil version because it's the sample test, but the grid looks the same without the information on the bottom, right? For the students on the computer-based test, they type the answer in. One of the things you'll notice is the slash is the fraction bar, right? Or they can answer with a decimal point. But that's something you'll want to make sure your students understand, is that that's the way that they designate a fraction or a decimal there when they're marking their answers on the test.
So, Becky, do I understand correctly? It's not just the old-fashioned paper and pencil that are coming up with that, but
Correct.
on the computerized version, they're going to
It's on the
see something like
computerized
that?
version as well. Yep. It's
Oh,
on
that
the
could
computerized
totally
version.
throw my students for a loop.
Yep.
I mean,
Yep.
we grew up filling in those kind of bubbles, but hey, I'm a few generations older than my students. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, yeah. So you want to be sure that the students are aware of that and that they know that they could encounter these, they're going to encounter these kinds of questions on the math test, definitely.
Becky?
Yeah.
And I see Ruth had a really good question in the chat, and you
Oh.
can address it when time allows or when
Sure.
most appropriate. But it has me thinking too, with the journey to enrollment and how maybe we've always done it this way, and they come and we sit them and give them that first pretest. What are the implications for pre-teaching some of this? Because to Ruth's point, if they don't have that familiarity, it's more of a test-taking skill than it is a computational skill. And how might that inform that time between intake, orientation, and pre-testing?
I think it's definitely something that programs need to think about, how they're going to orient students to the test. And I'm actually going to talk about one of the tools that's available for the online version. I think a lot of that orientation happens in the paper pencil version through the practice items and through the test directions. But definitely, if you're doing the online version, there are some tools that DRC gives us to use that are going to make that a bit easier for programs. But you do have to think about when and how you're going to introduce those to students. And Ruth, I do see your question there. Would we create a special account or just our real name? Our staff has just used their real name. And you can enter yourself as a student. You don't have to show anybody your score report. I mean, usually our teachers do well, but yeah, we've had our teachers do this, and they typically just enter themselves under their own name, and assign themselves the test.
Can I make a suggestion with regards to that? As someone who proctors exams and the anxiety level I see among teachers, like in praxis taking tests and recertification tests and things like that, I think if you truly want to get the experience, I would have a coworker walk you through the process as if you were a student, and taking that test. So you do have a little test anxiety, and you
Mhm.
know a coworker is going to see your results. So you can say, well, you're not going to share them, but on the other perspective, then are you truly getting a good experience? Because every time I have to recertify, and I know Andrew's got to see my recertification, I'm like, okay, try hard.
Can I echo that? When the 2014 series came out, or was released, I still lived in Pier, so I went down to the right turn, and Director Mary Gates administered my TABE subtest so I could take them and experience them. And knowing that the director was going to see my results, and my gosh, I should be able to pass, there was an incredible amount of test anxiety. So I can very much empathize and sympathize.
Yeah. And it's never a bad thing for us to put ourselves back in that position. Because I think that we can seem probably very glib to our students sometimes in terms of, oh, don't worry about it. It's nothing to panic about. When you're the one sitting down to take the test, there's some panic. It happens to all of us. So yeah, those are the gridded select or gridded response. Sorry. The next type is multiple select, and here students are asked to select multiple correct answers from the answer choices given. This is a newer feature on the 2014 test, and again, it ramps up the difficulty of the test situation for the student. Again, you see these multiple select items on all of the subtests. Here's an example from the reading sample test. Which two details from the article best support the answer to part A? So students are asked to select two from this list of 4 answer choices. The language sample test, this one is even more complex. The writer needs to add a concluding paragraph. Which 3 sentences combine to create an effective conclusion? And then the one from the math test, I think is kind of the epitome of difficulty for some of our students. Which attributes do all squares and all rhombuses have in common? Select all that apply. And you can see you have 6 answer choices here. And it doesn't tell you how many answers there are, right? How many correct answer choices there are. It could be 1, it could be 3, it could be 5. We don't know. So again, additional text complexity from some of these different kinds of test questions included on the TABE. And Jeremy mentioned, I found while teaching class that multiple select questions could confuse students. They're so used to the multiple choice or selected response where there's just one correct answer. I would agree completely, Jeremy. You need to prepare your students for the fact that there are going to be these different kinds of question types on the test. Yeah. The next question type we're going to talk about is evidence-based selected response items. And these combine a traditional selected response or multiple choice item with a second selected response question that asks students to show evidence from the text that supports the answer they selected to the first question. So these are 2 linked questions in content. This example is from the reading sample test, and you can see part A says, how does the author provide effective support for the main idea of the article? And again, you pick one answer choice here. And then part B says, which detail from the article best supports the answer to part A? So again, the content is linked. I'm not going to say if you get part A wrong, you're going to automatically get part B wrong, because if you're totally guessing, it's possible you could take a flyer on part B and get it correct, but it's going to be very difficult to get both parts right if you're doing a complete guess here, I would say. So again, increase in complexity and a different kind of test taking skill that we're asking our students to engage in. And then 2-part items are kind of similar but different, right? They consist of 2-part questions where the answer to part B is not at all dependent on the answer to part A. And here we see an example from the math test. In question number 1, there's a part A and part B. you look at the expression 10 plus x divided by 2. Part A asks you to evaluate the expression for x being equal to 4. And then you enter your response in that gridded area. Part B asks you to evaluate that same expression, 10 plus x divided by 2, when x is equal to 32. So here, you can get one right and get one wrong if you make an arithmetic error, right? But the questions are still combined into that two-part format.
And then I'm wondering, like the first one, the answer is 12. What if you blocked in the 1 and the 2 on the left rather than on the far right? Would that still be a correct answer
It
or
would
not?
still be a correct answer, Ruth. Yeah, you can put that answer, you can put it to the far left, you can put it in the middle, you can put it to the right. The only way it's going to be wrong is if you put 1 space 2, because the computer scoring will stop reading at the space.
Okay, wow.
Yeah.
I just am so surprised that they're doing this. I mean, we're not feeding things through machines anymore that need to read this kind of thing. I just don't see the purpose of using that format. But thank you for that extra information.
Yeah, absolutely. The last item then are technology enhanced items, and these appear on the computer-based tests only. An example of this would be in a reading test asking you to sequence items from a passage. And what you would do is you would drag and drop the statements into the correct order. So that's a technology enhanced item where you're doing something, the content is still, the content, but the mechanism for answering the question requires you to do something with your mouse, for example. Those are technology enhanced items. Questions about any of those? Again, it's not your grandpa's TABE test, right? There's a lot more content on there than the tests that we had all become accustomed to in the past.
Becky, I do have a question on the multiple select items when if it says like select all that apply, if there's 4 that are correct and they only select 2, is that whole question all right or all wrong then? Say number 7 has 4 answers.
Yes.
So it's either all right or all wrong.
It is.
Okay.
It is. You get points for part A, part B when you have the 2-part questions, but if it's select all that apply and you don't get all of them that apply, then it's just wrong.
Okay.
That's a very good question. Thanks.
Becky, I have a related question, similar to Denise's. I seem to recollect that on the evidence-based selected response items, you can, am I correct here, where in TABE, you can get that second question correct through a guess and it will count points,
Yes.
but that the GED also has evidence-based select response items, and in the GED, do I recall correctly that if you do happen to guess correctly, it doesn't matter, you don't get the points? And I don't want to complicate things here, but
yeah, I know that yes, there are evidence-based selected response on the GEDs as well. I can't say with 100% certainty that you're right about that distinction. It does seem right to me, but I would want to look it up before I committed to that. But yeah, that's part of the updates to the TABE are to make the skills needed to do well on the TABE test more reflective of the same skills on the GED test. So I want to go through just some really basic test administration practices. And again, hopefully this is review for all of you. But we do want to just put them to the top of our minds again. The TABE is a standardized assessment, which means it should be administered the same way for every student who takes it. And following those test administration procedures ensures that each test you give will be a valid and reliable measure of your students' abilities. So if the instructions, particularly those regarding the test times, use of the locator test, use of a calculator and other support materials aren't followed, the scores that you get really aren't going to be accurate for the students who have taken the test. So we know the TABE has two forms, Form 11 and Form 12. We always recommend you start with Form 11 for students who are doing their initial testing, right? And then after that, you go alternate forms, 1211, 1211, 1211 on subsequent tests. The one exception to that, I would say, is when students have been out of your program for a long time. If we have students who are gone for a year or more, we usually start again with the test, Form 11 test, because there's been a big enough gap there that you don't necessarily have to alternate. We consider it kind of a new testing platform and a clean testing situation there. The TABE has 5 test levels. L for literacy, we sometimes forget about that one. We hardly ever give it. If you've ever given it, you know it's not any fun, but there is that L literacy test. Most of the time we start with the E, easy, M, medium, D, difficult, or A, advanced. I do recommend that you make yourself familiar with what those letters stand for, because I cannot tell you in the last 24 years how many times I have sat down to discuss TABE test results with a student and shown them. So you took the level D test and they immediately say D for dumb. And I tell them, actually, no, D for difficult. It's the second hardest test that you can take. So I think it's important to help your students understand what those test features mean when you're sharing those results with them. Again, with the exception of the level L test, the locator test is used to determine the level of each subtest that should be given to each student. If you do paper pencil testing, the TABE 1112 features a different test direction book for each form of the test. There's specific directions for each section of the TABE test, including if you give it the word list, the practice exercises, the locator test, and then each subtest in the TABE battery. You need to familiarize yourself with all the test directions prior to starting a testing session, and you should also read the directions to students at the beginning and end of each subtest to ensure they're completing the test correctly and to maintain reliability and validity. And again, this is where, as John said, you could orient students to the features of the test that they're going to be taking. The practice exercises are also a good tool to use. If you've got students who are not as familiar with standardized testing formats and procedures, we have a lot of our students who come from our ESL classes and come to take their first TABE test who maybe have never taken a standardized assessment before. So they don't even understand, if you're doing a paper pencil, how to bubble in an answer sheet. So you do have to spend a little bit more time with some of our students, again, so that the actual test taking practice is not a barrier to their success on the test. Again, the locator test is not optional, especially for that initial complete test battery, to ensure that the tests are at the right level for the student's ability so that you have a valid score. Each TABE level represents a range of grade equivalents, and the locator tests place a student into the correct level for each subtest so that that test content reflects their skill levels. If you don't use the locator to place the student, the results might not be valid, and you might get an out of range score. And again, on the slide, you can see the grade equivalents for each TABE level. They're slightly different for reading language and math, but you can see the E is grade ranges 2.0 to 3.9. The M represents for reading and language 4.0 to 5.9, and for math 4.0 to 6.5. D 6.0 to 8.9 for reading and language, and 6.6 to 8.9 for math. And then the advanced level test for both reading language and math represents grade ranges 9.0 to 12.9 plus. And since skill levels vary by subject, it's likely that students won't take the same level test for all subtests. There's a few reasons that that's important, and I think that also it underscores the importance for that locator, right? There are some tools that you have available to you, and I'll show you where to find this one. I'm going to zip up to the top so you can see. It's the TABE tests of adult basic education 11 and 12 domain structure. If you've ever done the AEIDP with me, you've seen this form before, or you've seen this flyer before. But if you haven't, or if it's been a while, I like to look at the domain structure, particularly for the math test, when we think about test scores being out of range and why it's important to have that locator. When you look at the skills that are tested on each level of the math test, and I like to especially look like between level M and level A, right? Students who take the level M test aren't tested on functions or algebra, right? They don't do any of those skills at all on level M. Students on level A are tested on those things. You can see they're not explicitly tested on some of the other operations because those skills they figure are folded into some of the higher level operations that they're doing. And if they've scored on the locator and shown that they have skills in those areas, they don't need to take the big test on those areas. So even if a student receives the highest grade equivalent possible on the level M test, he or she has not really demonstrated proficiency in algebra or in functions. And those are important skills to have if they're moving on to the GED. So that's why the test isn't considered valid if they're out of range. It's outside the acceptable range. It's not a true picture of the student's skills. And when a student scores out of range on the table 11-12, they don't even get a score. The score sheet is going to say OR for out of range. There's not going to be any diagnostic information to use. And if a test is out of range, you should retest that student using the appropriate test level above or below that out of range test. We're going to look at the scoring best practice guidance handout in our third webinar, and that document really goes into what you can do to ensure that students are getting an in-range score. Judy had a question. Does the student take the locator even before their post tests? Judy, that's an excellent question. And typically, no. When you do that initial assessment, when they first come into your program, you want to do the locator before each of the subtests. But then, if a student is going to post test, if they pre-tested in Math M on the Form 11 test, you're going to post test them in Math M on the Form 12 test. The one exception to that, I would say, is if they are close to that score break point, you might want to bump them up, right? If they had a plus score on their score sheet, you might want to bump them up and give them the level D. And it's never wrong to give a student a locator before a post test, but it's not generally necessary. Does that answer your question?
Becky?
Yeah.
If a student is taking a post test at a higher level than their pre-test, are they almost certainly insured a gain?
No. No, especially not the way educational functioning levels work, right? I would say, the majority of our students make scale score gains when they bump up that level, but they don't necessarily make an EFL gain. And that distinction is hard for us. I think it's not as hard for the student. When the student sees the number go up, they're pretty happy. They don't necessarily care about EFLs as much as we do, or know about EFLs as much as we do. But yeah, they're not necessarily guaranteed a gain. And we've all, I think, had instances where my former colleague, John Taylor, used to come in occasionally and say, made this one dumber.
Oh.
You occasionally have those instances where that scale score will drop down a little bit, a few points for whatever reason. Bad day,
Right.
harder content maybe caused them a little more stress, those kinds of things. But no, you're not always guaranteed a gain just because they've gone up to another level. It's a good indicator that their skills are gaining, but you're not always guaranteed that NRS gain, certainly.
Well, Becky, when my students come in and they don't have the basic arithmetic skills, and so some of the things on the TABE are like, skip counting and such things, I don't know with the material that I'm teaching them that they're going to do better on that skip counting on a number line and this kind of thing. But I know that now they can plot points and they can that they're doing some upper level things. And that's why I'm kind of like wanting to understand the TABE better, so I understand if for a particular student, it would be advantageous to ask them to do one more evaluation, to do a locator again, just in case, they wouldn't score well on some of that arithmetic stuff that honestly, the GED, you got your calculator for pretty much the whole crazy thing. I mean, I would be so happy if the GED said, man, you need to know your multiplication tables. I would like everybody to. It's such a game changer in their self-esteem. And then when their children come home from school and they're like, hey, we got this, sweetheart. I can teach them to you because I know them. I would love for that to be my emphasis, but if people are coming in, they want that GED as fast as possible. I'm still figuring out what I'm doing.
Yeah.
But
well, and I think that, like I said, it's never wrong to give another locator test. I think also, using those score reports and looking at the areas where students missed a lot of questions, it tells you number correct and number attempted on those score reports. And I think that that's an area where you can look and see, was it 2 questions out of 3 that they missed? You might want to take a look at that, but it's still only 2 questions. If they're missing 5 or 6 questions in another content area, then that might be an area for focus of your instruction. And again, we'll be talking about that as well in another webinar. But I do think that it's I think we as teachers struggle with the calculator thing, right? And they get the calculator on the majority of the TABE math questions as well. But I think the other thing that we have to acknowledge is the world we live in is much different than the world we grew up in. If you had told me that I'd be carrying a computer around in my back pocket for the majority of my adult life, I wouldn't have believed you, right? But it's a tool that we have with us at all times now. And I do believe, I strongly believe in the need for teaching numeracy skills. Don't get me wrong. But I also think that we have to take, again, a realistic approach. Like you said, our adult learners are at a point in their life where they're looking at maximizing the time and effort that they're putting in and getting to the next stage in their goals as quickly as possible. And we do have to respect that. So yeah, I understand that struggle. I do.
And I would add, I think really that's the intersection of the art and science of education and adult education here, where you have them, we know generally for a very limited amount of time. And so how can you both or concurrently prepare them for the credential as well as give them those foundational skills or fill the gaps in those foundational numeracy and literacy skills that will affect their consumer literacy, health literacy, family literacy, financial literacy, etc. And then the other point I wanted to make regarding, if they get that plus on their score report and you need to post test them on a higher level, the feds, if they see that we're post testing on a lower level, that's really problematic because it calls into question the validity of the pretest.
Right.
But, I trust you wholeheartedly to navigate that with the student. If it's stressful, then maybe you don't emphasize it, but I'd like to hear some thoughts. I mean, to Becky's point, when I hear D is for dumb, I mean, it profoundly saddens me. And, I think we need to celebrate those scale score gains and not get them involved with the EF, the educational functioning level cuts, but even maybe in certain situations celebrate, listen, you're going from medium content to D difficult. And to Becky's point, right, this is the penultimate level. So I don't know if you have any thoughts or comments on that as well.
Yeah,
Can I make an unsolicited comment?
Absolutely.
So I hear what John's saying, and I feel the same way. And one thing that kind of, that I try to avoid as a teacher is to tell my students something is easy, because it's probably not easy for them. And so it always bugs me a little bit that E is for easy, because you tell them, well, you took it at the easy level, but for them,
Yeah.
it might have been one of the hardest tests they've ever taken in their life.
Yeah.
Amen. Amen.
And I feel like that can be discouraging to students. Emerging, I like John
I
put
like that, John.
emerging in the chat, sounds a little more, I don't know, sensitive.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. That's an interesting point,
Dignified.
Randy. Thank you for
That
that.
needs to go to DRC. I agree,
Yeah.
Jeremy.
Yeah.
The other thing to remember in this is, you as a program can decide how you all want to explain it.
Yep. Yep.
Just
Exactly.
make sure it's a program-wide decision, so two teachers aren't talking a different language.
Mhm.
To the
So is
same student.
that's something we could discuss then as a
Yeah.
program, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, because it's never published anywhere that the student sees. They don't see the E easy. They might see level E, but they don't see the full name on it. So yeah, absolutely. Good discussion. Thank you for that. I also just want to just briefly call out test times and accepted tools vary between the test levels on the table 11 and 12 too. So math subtests are the source of most of the variety here between the test levels. And again, making sure students have the right calculator on the level M. It's a basic function calculator, that basic 4 function. On DNA, it's a scientific calculator. On the level M, they need a protractor. So again, making sure that they have access to those tools can really affect the validity and reliability of the test and your student scores. And we'll talk more about some of those tools when we look at the online tool training in just a few minutes. So yeah, this is part of the challenge with this test. When we first got this paper pencil test, I have to tell you, I sat with all the books on my desk and just despaired at how much time it was going to take to figure it out and then to administer it. And it really is considerable. So I know that most programs in the state have gone to the online testing, and I think it's a huge advantage just in terms of the amount of time that it takes us to administer the test. The test is standard for students across the board, paper, pencil, computer-based testing. But I do think that there's a vast difference in the amount of administrative work that it takes, paper pencil versus online.
What we're seeing on the screen is only for paper pencil administration then. If they're
No.
taking the online, they have the drop-down calculator, or
Well, they do have the drop-down calculator. They have the on-screen calculator. They have an on-screen protractor, but you also have the ability to give them a physical calculator if they prefer.
okay, boy, I think we only have GED calculators here at the right turn.
Yeah, the
And
scientific
so-
calculator is the same, but yeah, we do have some basic 4 function calculators in the building to give students if they are taking that level M.
You can buy them for $1 at the Dollar Tree.
Yeah, Dollar Tree.
Okay.
It's not an expense.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And you don't need that many. I mean, I think we've
True.
got maybe half a dozen here, and that's
Yeah.
more than we need.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. One would see us
Yeah.
through then.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
yep. Again, a large part of test validity is keeping testing materials secure, whether they're paper, pencil, or computer-based. And this is another of my soapboxes. You should never, ever use TABE test questions to help students understand how to answer a particular question. So if a student gets a question wrong, you should not work through that problem with the student to illustrate the correct method for finding the answer. We have TABE test diagnostics to help us understand the kinds of questions that give students difficulty. And then you should use other instructional resources to help teach students how to do those problems correctly, answer those questions correctly. When you instruct students by using actual test items, you invalidate that test item. You also need to keep all testing documents secure, and that includes not only any physical test books and answer documents, but also your TABE test directions books and any scratch paper used from testing. If students copy test questions and answers onto their scratch paper and take it with them, again, that compromises the validity of the test. And if they write down that test question that they don't understand and they bring it to you and lay it on your desk and say, can you show me how to do this question? Don't do it. Look at a similar question, find it in a book, and show them on a similar question. We don't use our official GED write on wipe off boards for scratch paper at Cornerstones. We've just laminated plain pieces of cardstock that we give our students for scratch paper with the write on wipe off markers, because again, we're getting them accustomed to the final GED testing environment that they're going to be working in. And it cuts down on the amount of paper that we're putting out into the world. So, you know, that's another way. Then we just erase them and everything's gone. So. And again, part of test security is ensuring that students can't replicate or photograph any parts of a standardized test. And so we have them put away their cell phones. We check their glasses. We don't let them take a smartwatch in. You know, we basically follow the same kind of test protocols that final GED testing follows. At Cornerstones, we've got sets of lockers, right, with keys. So we have them put their stuff into the locker, lock it up, hand them the key. When they come out from their testing situation, they can open up their locker, take their stuff out, and go on their way. So electronic devices, any books or papers, no headphones or earbuds. We can give them earplugs. We give them the little foam earplugs if they are sound sensitive. No purses, backpacks, food, drink. It's a clean testing environment. This also ensures that students aren't interrupted or distracted during their tests.
We also need to remind staff, me being one of them, because I walk by that room a lot, that they are testing and I shouldn't be having a conversation, even though the door is closed.
Yeah, we try and keep the environment as close to a formal testing environment as we can. And again, that it helps a lot for students to know, when I come to take a test, this is how it's going to be. And I do think that a lot of our students have far less test stress coming in for final GED assessments because they've had that same kind of environment in the same space when they've done their TABE tests, when they've done GED ready tests, any of those kinds of things. Any questions, comments on anything so far? So I know, again, most of the programs in the
Becky?
state. Oh, sorry.
I just thought of a really dumb question that I should have asked a long time ago. I do almost all TABEs that I do are online, which you're about to talk about. And so
Yep.
maybe you're going to answer my question in about 2 seconds. But whenever I do a TABE in person, you know, we take the scratch paper and we shred it. And I like your idea of the we have marker boards here and laminated paper here. I'll probably switch to that now. But I haven't been, how do you collect online paper, scratch paper?
You need to make, when you do a remote testing, you need to make sure that you tell them, like, you ask them to destroy their scratch paper in front of you.
Okay. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I don't know why this is the first time that dawned on me. I'm sorry.
No, that's a very good question. And there's actually, we're gonna go through, I'm going to show you some of the remote testing guideline things, but yeah, it's ask them to destroy their scratch paper in front of you. Tear it into pieces, throw it away. It's not a perfect situation, but you know, you're asking them to do what you can ask them to do. Yeah, good question. That was not a dumb question at all. Thank you for that. And yes, and there is a paper version of the 11 and 12 TABE. It's expensive to buy those paper versions. It's a lot of testing materials. So again, test administration, I think, is much easier with online TABE. Once you register the student for the test and explain the online testing system, the computer does the majority of the work for you, right? It will put them into a locator test, and immediately after the locator test, It will tell them which level of the main test they're going into, and that level will be available to them. If you're doing paper pencil testing, you have to score that locator, determine the correct level of the subtest, get the correct books and answer sheets out, make sure they've got all the correct materials, that kind of thing. And again, you still need to monitor students to ensure that the test protocols are followed, but the scoring and timing and all of those things are done for you. The same test content and norming from paper pencil to online. Again, the technology enhanced items are slightly different. When you have the gridded response, you're not, writing in and bubbling your answer, you're just typing the answer into the boxes. But I think very much easier to administer because the timing and scoring are done for you. Anybody else who's done both have any comments in terms of different versions?
Becky, this is Carla.
Yeah.
I've done both of them. One of the things I like to have the paper ones available because on occasion my internet is not the best. And if I have somebody scheduled to come in, do the tape and I can't get them on the computer to do it, I can whip out. I'd much sooner have the computer one because you get the diagnostic and all that. So it's a lot easier on you. But I think it's good to know how to do the paper ones for something like that.
Absolutely, Carla.
They
I agree.
upgraded my internet now, so I don't have such a trouble, but man, I used to have lots and lots of trouble and it was really annoying.
Sometimes just there's just funny quirks and glitches too in some of the online things that we do. But yeah, we always have them for a backup. It's you never know when you might need one. So I do think that, programs who do the online testing, it's good to have a handful of paper pencils as backups for different occasions that might come up. But yeah, we are almost exclusively online. And as Kim said in the chat, we don't use the paper pencil unless it's a pretty unique situation. If we absolutely have to, we're pretty much exclusively online. But yeah, I would agree with you. It's good to have some paper ones on hand and to know how to use them. I would have to really go back and I would be really reliant on the test directions books at this point if I had to go back and do a paper pencil. It's been a while.
And then with the paper pencil, it's a matter of scoring. Because really you need how many different, and they sell them in minimum packages of 25.
Yeah.
So you need booklets of 11E, 12E, 12, 11M, 12, etc. If you're, serving a diverse population. So it quickly becomes difficult. Now, you could potentially cost share those with other agencies. Then they have the more expensive Scorees, I believe it's called, where it automatically, what does it do? Of course, it's a one-time use answer sheet.
It's like a
quick score.
Yeah, quick score, carbon
Right.
thing. Yeah. But yeah, they're considerably more expensive. So yeah, it's I think once you go to the online, you never would go back. The literacy test is strictly on paper, Ruth. That's a good question. Yeah. And I'm not going to talk about that a lot today because we don't do a lot of them, but I will just say, if you ever have to administer a literacy test, feel free to reach out. I have done some in the past. Nikita Maddox in our Yankton office has done a few. It's a different kind of test because you are the one doing much of the reading on the literacy test because you're testing some of those very basic literacy skills, some phonemic awareness, the phonics skills, listening. So it's a different kind of test administration. It's one-on-one and it is strictly paper. So yeah, that's the one thing that you can't do online. Okay, so I want to take a look at some of the features of the online and computer-based testing system and platform, just so that if there are any questions that you have about using the actual DRC platform, that we can address them, okay? So I've actually got DRC Insight pulled up here and I maximized my screen. I blew it up a little bit, so hopefully y'all can see it. I'm gonna sign in. I have taken steps to ensure that I won't show any confidential student information today. If I mess it up, I'll just edit it out of the video. But when you log in to DRC Insight, you come to this landing page. Most of the things that I am going to show you, you can also find on this landing page. So I'm going to scroll down and just show you right now. Debbie mentioned remote testing. Instructions for remote testing and other helpful resources can be found at tabetest.com. I'm going to go on to that webpage a little bit later, but that's really kind of the hub for TABE resources. So if you haven't been to that website before, it's different than the DRC portal. It's tabetest.com. Again, there is some other information here, but then the accessing online tools training is down here towards the bottom. And I'm going to go in and show you that a little bit later as well. But you can find that on this DRC landing page. So when you log into DRC Insight, you'll have those links. You'll just have to scroll down the page to see them. Again, you should see the TABE and then the My Applications menu up here at the top. I'm going to start up on student management, which quite honestly is one of the tabs that I rarely go to. I usually do most of my stuff through the test management tab, but here you can go in, and when you click on manage students, one of the reasons I hate going into this website live is because it is the slowest website I think that I've ever worked on. And I come from the world of dial-up, so there we go. Here you can see, you can search for a student, right? So you can go in and put in student last name, first name. You don't have to put them both. You can put in a student ID number if you're recording a student ID. You can look for a specific test session or an online test status. And then you click on find students and it will find that student. If you scroll down, this is also where you can add a student. If we click on the add student button, it's going to make us wait for a minute. Oh, that was pretty quick. And here is where you can enter a new student for testing. So again, last name, first name, middle initial is not required, but you can use it. Again, if you're not putting the middle initial in LACES, don't put it in DRC because I think that that's one of the things that keeps us from talking to each other for those imports. Student ID number is a number that you generate yourself. I would strongly advise against using social security number just because I don't like to put anybody's social security number any more places than we have to. Test administration is always the TABE. Your district is South Dakota Department of Labor. Your school is going to be your school. Mine is Cornerstones. Again, student birth date, the grade is always adult. You can't change that. And then gender, we have female, male, and either non-binary or prefer not to answer as choices there. That's all you have to put in to enter a student for a TABE test online, but you have some other information here as well. This accommodations tab is where you can, if you have a student who has a diagnosed learning disability that gives them accommodations for extended time, untimed tests, or tests read to them, you have the options to go in and identify which tests you are giving the accommodations for and which accommodations you're giving. So you can see you've got extended time, 1.25 times, 1.5 times, 2 times. You have an untimed test, and then you have the text to speech option. And again, you're really going to focus on these first couple, locator 1112, table 1112. We don't give the 910 anymore, and we don't give class E in South Dakota. If you give them the text to speech option, their test is always automatically going to be untimed. So you can pick that one as well, but it's going to automatically give them that accommodation as well. So all you have to do is click there and save, and it will give them those accommodations. There's also a demographics tab, and none of this information is required, but you can go through and you can fill out this information. And again, this is not where the accommodations are granted in the testing platform. That's under the accommodations tab, but you can list out that this student did have accommodations if they're if they have ESL status, their employment status, their public assistance status, their
Becky?
diploma status, those things.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
On that previous screen where it said text to speech, does that mean they read it to the student?
Yes.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that. Okay,
Yep.
cool.
Yep, it's built right in, which is nice. So yeah, if you have a student who has that accommodation that they can have content read to them, if they're, they have a reading disability that prevents them from being able to read off the screen, or if they have a vision impairment that prevents them from being able to read on the screen, you can do the text to speech option for them.
Okay,
Becky,
wonderful.
when you just are looking at those accommodations, you need to have the documentation to back
Yep.
that up before you do that, correct? And then,
Exactly.
so like, if they bring an IEP or testing from high school or whatever, that would be a backup. And then also, what would you do to decide, because sometimes they have on there that they get extended time or untimed tests, whatever. How would you decide which one you're going to give them for the extension? Is it a time and a half or double time? What
Yeah.
would you do? Because
Really good-
sometimes it doesn't pinpoint.
Right. I was going to
But,
say really
you know.
good IEPs will tell you, not so good IEPs won't. I think we've all seen examples of both. I do this through a conversation with the student and just ask them, about how much time would you get when you would take a test in school, those kinds of things. So yeah, it's that one is harder when they don't specifically say. My default is usually time and a half, if it doesn't say specifically.
It seems like the GED testing service that I've dealt with too, that is generally about what they usually give
Oh,
to us,
big
time
time.
and a half. That's their, I did have one student that got double timed once, but usually time and a half. So basically when we're doing these accommodations, we're not deciding that they need accommodations. We have to have the documentation to back that up, correct? Yeah. Okay,
Correct.
thank you.
Yep.
Becky, these accommodations don't automatically go toward their like their GED readies and things, do
No.
they?
No.
Those have to be
Yep.
redone in
Yep.
their GED.com. Yes.
Yes, exactly. Yep, just for TABE.
And please, anyone correct me if you think this is not a fair assertion, but oftentimes students don't have or I shouldn't say oftentimes, there are occasions where students have no documentation, or they're older and never got diagnosed. And, you have the ability to give them untimed test, but DRC has a reference regarding validity and reliability for when that happens.
Mhm.
There might be situations where you want to give an untimed test, and where test validity is the highest priority, right? It's meeting the learner where they are. But if they're not going to qualify for accommodations on the GED, then I think we should ask ourselves, what would justify accommodations for this assessment?
Yeah.
But again, you might want to, there might be situations, but I think we want to use those sparingly. They should be the exception, not the rule, because the more we do that, it really does invalidate the test reliability.
Yeah.
So John, if that would happen, what do you recommend? Would it be like a good practice to, just like document that in their file, something like that? Would that be, with justification of why you did that? Would that be a good thing to do?
Definitely. And for our Title II programs, the documentation should be in LACIS. Yeah, for those sorts of instances. And if you have questions, please call. Disability services are really one of my areas of weakness, or I don't have a lot of experience there. And so I look to the field and I look to our partners for assistance. And my window is pretty narrow regarding that test validity and reliability and really work readiness. How can we, in the larger sense, get them ready to advocate for themselves as it relates to reasonable accommodations in the workplace, et cetera? As an English language and ESL background, I think it's ridiculous that non-native speakers can't have double time on the GED, but it does being an English language learner doesn't constitute
Disability.
validation or reason for an accommodation. So anyway.
Yep. Ruth, I'm going to answer your questions out of order. If a pretest was timed, would an untimed post-test be valid? I would say yes, if you had gained documentation for accommodations in between the pretest and the post-test. So for example, a student comes to you, they're a new student. In the instance John was talking about, they don't have documentation of a disability, but through your pretesting and your subsequent work with them, you determined that that might be possible for them, that they might be able, they might have some kind of learning disability, they might be able to get documentation for it. They arranged for that, they got that documentation, and that documentation says they need to have an untimed test environment. In that case, I would say yes, even though you had a timed pre-test, that untimed post-test would be valid. Does that make sense?
Great question, by the way.
Yeah, it is a good question. And then you said you've been told a non-reader is being sent to you. That would be an instance where I would start with the TABE word list and the level L literacy testing materials if the word list indicated. So you might want to see if you've got those materials available to you and review those test directions for level L testing.
John, is
Yeah.
that you have at the state level, or?
When we made those initial investments, we put those funds out for AFLA providers to make those investments. I don't have a
Okay.
repository of literacy Ls. That's not to say, because we already have a TABE account, that I couldn't use state leadership to order a bundle and then, we share them. I order a couple bundles and then send 5 or 10 here and there. We could talk about that during our monthly AEL administrators meeting. And do we want scorees, or do we want the other answer sheet, that type of thing? Or no, that wouldn't even be relevant there, would it? Because it's
because
it's red.
it's just the
Yeah.
booklet. It's that
Okay.
level L booklet.
But no, that's a good question. I don't have any TABE level L resources.
And it might be good for directors to look at what they already have available.
Yeah.
Because sometimes, like,
Wait,
some of us have inherited other people's stuff, and we may have stuff that we could let other people have.
Sure.
And I do have, though, this series of discs, and I wonder if TABE L is part of that. Nikita is generally the state's primary user of those video series or disc series. Good questions, though.
Yeah. So yeah, that's the student management tab. And again, you can also use this to find a student. I can show you. We have a student at Cornerstones whose name is Test Student. And there is Test Student. So once you search on the student's name and click Find Students, the student record will come up. If you just search last name, you might get multiples. If you've got several students named Nguyen, which we do. And you can go in and you can view or edit the student's record. So that's a situation where you could go in and you could add accommodations after the fact if the student did get documentation, or if they had documentation previously and just hadn't shared it with you, which also happens more than we want. So yeah, that's the student management tab. Usually, I said I don't go into student management much because there's another way to enter students, and that's through the test management tab. And that's where I do most of my work when I go into the online TABE platform. So I go to test management and then click on manage test sessions. Again, there's a little bit of wait time. You can see there's no test sessions showing here. I'm going to do something I never do, and I'm just going to leave all of the search fields empty. And I'm going to click on show sessions, and we're going to have to sit and wait for a minute. But this is because I want to show you why I think it's a good idea to do strategic naming of your test sessions. All right, that was shorter than I thought it was going to be. Here are all of the Cornerstones test sessions, and I'm just going to scroll. There's a lot of them, and there's multiple pages down here, right? If I go in though, and I say just fiscal year 24 and show sessions. Now you can see there's only one page and it's a shorter page. So I don't have to search through so many sessions to try and find the one I want. You can additionally narrow it down by either TABE 11 or TABE 12 and show sessions.
And Becky, are you suggesting this is because of your naming conventions, or does the session name default to FY24, the agency name, the level and form?
It does not. So the only things that default in here, you can see this, this information down at the bottom, the district, South Dakota Department of Labor, the school, those auto-populate, right? The assessment, when you choose the assessment for the session, is going to show you TABE 11 or TABE 12. You enter the session name. So we started entering our sessions all starting with FY and then whatever the fiscal year is. And then we do CCLC and then whatever the test is. You can see we've got like TABE 12 complete battery, TABE 12 reading only, which is the locator plus the reading tests for TABE 12. This is how we do it. I know Black Hills does something similar because in another training that we had, we talked about it at one point. It just makes it a little bit cleaner. And this way we don't have to search through so much. You can literally create a new test session every time you enter a student. I can't imagine what that would look like. It would be a little crazy, right? And I'm not sure how you'd ever find them again other than just, you know, searching that student name and looking at the test sessions they were entered into. You can also narrow it down by teacher. Like our teachers right now, it's scheduled to all. You can look at them in date range. But this way, you know, if you give them an identifier that's going to mean something to you and narrow the field for you, I think you're going to be far better off as you get more and more students and sessions in. And then you've got some information here as well. You know, you can narrow down, you can actually put a student name in and find the test sessions that that student is associated with as well. But you can also go in and you can look at the specific test session information here. You've got some dialog buttons, so you can view or edit this actual test session. This is usually how I go in and enter a new student. I don't enter them in student management and then assign them to a test session. I go in through the test session that I want to assign them to, and then I enter them as a student. So if it's for a post-test, they're probably already in the system, and then you can just find students. You can type the last name in and click on find, but you can also click on this button that says new student, and that's going to open that same student dialog box that we just saw under the student management tab, with all of the same fields that you can fill out. And again, the accommodations and demographics are there to enter that new student. When you enter that student, they'll pop down in here into the list of available students. You have to make sure you save in order to get them saved. So you have to save under the student entry, and then you have to save again under the test management entry. You can see.
So sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Judy, were you going to say something? Oh, so Becky, you have that range of classes where, you know, reading only, the complete battery, language, etc. And so depending on those students' needs, that's one way to populate those test sessions, is to create that student within whatever that student might need. Maybe they just the math only, they're coming from a different, okay.
Yep. Yeah, if we have a student, say it's a returning student or a student that we've gotten from another prep center, and they've already completed everything but their math test. I don't want to give them the complete battery TABE. I'll go in and give them the math only, make them take the locator for the math tests, and that's the test that we use as their test of record. And then again, for post-testing, we can pick the post-test, like this would be a post-test situation, right? TABE 12, just the language, level M. If I know somebody needs to post-test on TABE language level M and a 12, then I can go in and enter them into this test session.
And so you could put test student in there and it would populate on that bottom left box? Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Becky, I had a question.
Yes.
You made that comment like they don't need the whole battery. If
Right.
we enter them for the whole battery and then discover they actually did take it, we only need half of it, it always shows the student didn't complete.
is there a way to go in there and delete those so we don't have 50 guys that are incomplete because we scheduled them for some by accident and they actually weren't supposed to be in that one?
So if they start the test session, you can't delete them out of it.
It's like if we had the whole battery, they took the math, we found out we didn't need the reading, so they never take the reading. And then
No.
just sits there for the entire fiscal year.
Yep. Sorry. Yeah. I do go through periodically and clean them out, right? And that's another thing that you have the ability to do in this test management window. You can go in and do an export details. It's not going to look that great on this one. But this is what you get when you do export details on a test session. There's only this one student entered on this one, but again, you've got the TABE administration, the district code, all of this stuff, session name, the test, the assessment name. This is the begin and end date for the test session, okay? Everything after that is student information. So the student's last name and first name, their ID number, their grade, their username and password. So this is another place you can find that if you're looking for it. And then the status for these tests is not started. So they haven't started the language 12 practice test and they haven't started the language 12 test itself. If they had started, it would show us the date started and date completed. And this would actually have timestamp information too. So if you want to know how much time a student spent on a subtest, you can go into this report and see it. So, and then whether they had any accommodations and what form they took, which the computer assigns that. So this is a place where you can go back and check and see, and anybody who has not started, you can take them out of that test session and get rid of them.
How are columns I and J different from columns R and S?
This is the begin and end date for the test session that I created.
Oh, the fiscal year. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
You're welcome. And then this is the date started and date completed for the actual subtest. I know it's confusing. It confused me at first too. And a lot of times when I use this, what I do is I get rid of everything except the assessment name and, and then the student stuff afterwards and just look at the fields that I need. So I'll go through and hide the columns that I don't want to look at so that I don't get too distracted by the information that I don't really need. But yeah, that's a good one to look at if you're wanting to see who's started, who's completed, those kinds of things. You also have the ability here to copy a test session if you want to copy it and rename it for next year. Here's where you can view and print your test tickets for that test session. So again, I've only got one student here, but here's where I could go in, and if I had multiple students, but I only wanted to print this one student's test ticket, I could click on it, hit print selected, and print that test ticket for that student. So they had, I had the information to lay down next to their computer when they were ready to log in.
And that information is specifically is that user ID and password?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. You can also print all tickets. I have never done that, but it is a feature that you have. And this last one is if you want to delete the session. The other tab that I go into quite often is report delivery. I'm not going to go in there today because we're going to have a whole webinar on reports and using reports and getting reports. So just know that that report delivery tab is there for you. And there are different types of reports in there for your.
I have a question, Becky. When would be the best time to use the practice? Because I'll be honest, when I do it, I have them do just the part 1, 2 and tell them, I do locator, okay, skip the practice and do the 1, 2. When is a good time to use the practice?
I think if they're uncertain, if they seem a little shaky on like how the computer platform works, the practice is also an opportunity for like you to sit with them and work through it with them without affecting the test validity reliability. So if they seem a little unsure about it, or if they lack in a little bit of confidence, I always tell them, the practice questions are there. So, to give you an idea of what the test is like. You can go through them if you want to, but it is not required. But yeah, if I've got somebody who's a little shaky, I might have them go into the practice test and do a few of them. You don't have to do the whole thing in the practice, right? It's not scored at all. So you can walk them through a couple of questions, make sure they understand how everything works, and then tell them, okay, if you feel comfortable, now you can go into the test and go through it. That's a good question.
When could we delete tests? Like we said, if it gets really busy down there and all of a sudden we're scrolling and there's 30 and 40 lines, and then you go in there and the guy you set the test up for because it was the wrong test, he never even took it.
Yeah.
Can we, John, this is more a question for you. Can we delete those if it's like not actually doing anything?
Cynthia, in the past, I tried to heuristically just navigate around there, and after blowing about $70 worth of admins because I thought I was doing just that, but I was somehow like activating them. Becky, can you provide some guidance? So at that point, I was just like, I do this so seldom. I'm just going to avoid it, please.
Yeah, I go through, I use that report that I just showed you. And if somebody has not started the test, and I only do it like maybe twice a year. If somebody has not started the test, I look at, kind of their records to see how new they are. And, if that administration has been sitting there for 4 months, I'll delete them out of that test session. I don't delete a whole test session until the very end of the year, and then I'll take them out. If we never used one, right? We don't post test on, well, like there's a reason that 12 language M, the only person in there was test student, right? I searched to find one. So at the end of the year, if there are some of those test sessions that they didn't have any students in them, nobody ever started the test, I'll go through and delete those sessions just to call out those kinds of things. But if somebody has started an assessment and you're deleting them, or you're deleting a test session, you're going to destroy records. So I would be very, very careful. I would be certain of what you're doing before you do that. Let me put it that way.
So Becky, and maybe that was kind of the crux of my issue. So if someone was assigned, there was an agency that would automatically assign all three, right? Doesn't matter what they needed. That was part of their protocol. And I think, so if I delete that and they only took one assessment, I was essentially burning the other two.
Yeah.
Would that be a potentiality? Was that?
I think so.
So I think we want to be real careful there. And Ruth had a question there about TABE information. Do you want to address that?
Yeah, and yeah,
I mean, I have my perspective.
Should you be entering demographics? It's not necessary, but I think, especially when the TABE 11-12 was new, I wanted to give them as much information as I could about the people who were taking the tests and the kinds of performance they were seeing on it. So I did a lot more entering of demographics when the 11-12 was new. If it's going to take you a long time to do it, don't do it, right? If it's time prohibitive, don't do it. But it never hurts. And then from LSS, we're wondering if there's still a survey test. There is not. They eliminated that survey version of the test. So there's not a shorter version, it's just the full test. However, I mean, for our purposes, when we have an ESL student who needs to take a TABE because they've scored out of the best range, we don't give them the complete battery. We usually give them the language test, and that's a shorter test. It's the shortest test, I believe. So.
And Ruth, I would just add too, we've got to at least have enough information that we can correlate the record from DRC to TABE, but that's all asterisks, right? The name and the date of birth. And beyond that, to Becky's point, anything you want to put in there is really your call. My priority would be LACIS. I want more detail in LACIS. And I know Cynthia might not like all those lines, but I don't spend a lot of time in DRC looking at that from the local level. So obviously our priorities and perspectives are different, but LACES data and comments and notes are, I value and prioritize much more so than any superfluous data entry in TABE DRC.
Yeah. I wanted to take you into the TABE online tools training because this is a feature that I'm not sure a lot of people are aware of or have used, and it's a really great feature. Again, you can find the link on that DRC landing page, and I'll show it to you again. You can go into any one of these tests and do an online tools training. I like to go into the Math M. You can see you get standard or audio, so you can have it read to you if you want to. I'm going to click on the standard here today, and then it auto populates because I've got my password manager on, but it tells you the username and password that you need to enter in. Math MOTT is what that is. And then test 1, 2, 3, 4 is the password, and you sign in. I don't want to add that to my password manager. So you can see it's a training student, and it's going to give you the same look as the TABE welcome screen. I always try and go in and show students these options. They can change the background color of their screen. If the black and white is too harsh for them, they can have their pick there. They can also do what they call contrasting color, which changes both the background and the text color to different options. And if they like the dark screen, they can enable the reverse contrast. Now, I like the dark screen, but that orange on there is horrible to me. So I don't like that one. I do have a lot of students who will go in and they'll use those options, and those options are available. That is not an accommodation that requires documentation. Any tester can do the screen color change. Okay. Again, you navigate through this just like you do the regular TABE test. So you would encourage the students to read all the directions, make sure that they understand how to navigate. It walks them through like all of the tools that they have, the flags there, how to use the back and next, how to use the review and end screen. And it talks about the helpful hints and some of the tools that they have. And I just want to make sure that you are all aware of all the available tools they have too. So I'm actually going to kind of walk through them. Students can skip to any question by using the down arrow next to the question. They always have a help screen available to them. And then they've always got that options button that does the same thing with the color choices. It also includes masking, and masking allows them to basically cancel a part of the screen if they don't want to be distracted by it. So they can add a mask over things if they want to. They've got a highlighter tool at the top, so they can highlight if they want to. They have sticky notes that they can write to themselves and then keep. If they just want to keep it there, it's still there. If they want to delete it, they can delete it. They have a magnifier. They can magnify their screen times 1.5 or times 2 if they've got some vision impairment, or if, as we know, they leave their glasses at home. Again, you can see here's the calculator. Because this is the level M test, this is the basic 4-function calculator. And they've always got those reference sheets available to them as well. So you want to make them aware that they've got those tools available. They've also got the ability to flag a question. So if they want to go back to that question, they can. Here again is where you can show students. Sometimes you have to type in the answer, right? So they might have to type in an answer here, and you'll recognize these questions. This is the sample that we took those questions from, right?
Becky,
so this is like the gridded items. Go ahead, Jen.
I know the pause button down there. I had one
yeah.
student that needed to use the restroom quick, and she tried doing the pause, and it didn't, it kept going. So
the timer still runs.
Noise work.
Yeah, the timer still runs. That's one of the things with pause. The timer doesn't stop. It just like it blanks your screen so you can come back to it. Yeah.
How long does
Um,
it take to do that training thing?
It's unlimited. This one is only, I want to say 8 questions. Yeah, this one is 8 questions. So you can walk them through it pretty quickly. They don't have to answer any of the questions here. I mean, you can have them click them just to show them kind of how, and if they want to change their answer, they just change their answer, right? So, I'm going to click through. Oh, wait, I'm going to click back through here. The line guide really is more useful in a reading test, but I'll show you on this screen with the math. The line guide is just, it's a guide, like a little guideline. So if they have a hard time tracking while they're reading on screen, if they've got a lot of text, they can use that line guide. And you can just click on it again to turn it off. There's one I want to get to here. Oh, here's the one where what attributes do all squares and rhombuses have in common. You can show them, like you can click as many of these as you want to, and it's not going to cancel any of them off, right? That's one of those multi-answer questions. Here it tells you use the protractor to help you solve this problem. Here's the protractor under measurements tools. So you click and drag the protractor to get it wherever you want it to go, right? We'll see how good I am today. Actually, this is a point where I might magnify, even though I'm not vision impaired, right? So I can get a little more precise.
There you go.
And then you grab the side of it and you can angle. And you can see I'm not perfect, but I think that if I look at my answer choices, it's 145. And then I can go back up and I can turn the magnification off after I've answered. So it's just a good way. And this is the end screen where you can see, like, you can tell the questions that I answered. You can, if I had any questions flagged, it would show a flag. I can jump back to a question that I didn't answer and review it at this point. So it's just, it's a dead space testing platform. So you can show them exactly what the test is going to look like when they get into it and the kinds of things they're going to have to do. So that's a really good tool to use with your students.
Becky, what was that reference sheet one?
The reference sheet is like formulas that they might need. So how do you find the perimeter of a rectangle? So they don't have to have that formula memorized. They just have to know, oh, what I need here is the perimeter of a rectangle formula. What was that again?
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Yep. And then the last one I was going to show you is just the remote proctoring guideline. And again, it comes with links to all of the different guides that you want to find. And I'm going to go back. My dear,
I want to go with those links. We type them in, Becky, but if you are setting it up and you type it in chat and then the student gets in the chat after you typed it, it doesn't, it's not there anymore. Or something, they can't see it.
Yeah. So again, that instructions for remote testing and all of those other things can be found at this tabetest.com website. If you go into resources, TABE 1112, you're going to find all of the things that I just showed you. And you can also see, like, down this first one, the online tools training is available there as well. Remote proctoring guide is available there. Test taker tips. There's a lot of great information on this website, the tabetest.com website, which is DRC's kind of public-facing website, where the portal is, where you're actually doing your test management. Any questions about any of that? We've got like 1 minute left. Oh, apparently I never filled in the date and time on my upcoming training. Next week, at the same time, 10 a.m. Central, 9 a.m. Mountain, we're going to be looking at the TABE, the NRS, and South Dakota assessment policy during the same time. So we'll talk about TABE testing in connection with NRS levels and with our state assessment policy, and what kinds of things we need to be aware of in terms of all of the policies and procedures from our state and federal guidelines when we're doing TABE testing. And then the following week, the last one will be TABE results analysis. That's when we'll look at a lot of the reports that we use. Ruth, no, you would find the directions that you should read students prior to the test in your test directions booklets, which I think you're going to have at your site. And that's if you're doing the paper pencil test. If you're doing the online testing, the test directions are on screen. So you're just going to want to make sure the students are actually reading through the screens at the beginning of the test to get those test directions.
Okay, not the little pep talk that you give them beforehand about
exactly.
Don't guess on the locator.
Yep.
Okay.
Just terrific questions today. I'm really glad that everyone was able to make time for this. Becky, excellent job. Regarding that question, I wonder within the DRC Insight portal, Becky, there's a general drop-down reference, and you could also download the TABE test directions and
you are correct. Yes.
All those resource guide, the norms book, and a whole bevy of resources there.
You're right, John. Thank you for calling that out. Yep. I will make a note to pop into that and show us next time, just to make sure everybody knows where to find that under the general directions or general.
So Becky, I learned a lot today.
I'm glad, Judy.
Yeah.
And yeah, we will pick up next week again, same time. It's the same web link as well, same Zoom link. So hopefully that'll make it easy for you to find us next week. And I hope you have an excellent rest of your Friday and a fabulous weekend. It sounds like we're supposed to have great weather across the state. So get out and enjoy it while we can.
Becky, this is Amy from LSS. This may not apply to anyone else, but I have a few questions for you.
Sure.
Maybe after or whatever.
Sure.
Okay. So this whole thing is completely new to everyone in my program at LSS. We've never given this before. So maybe I have questions that nobody else has.
Sure.
I'm just wondering, so you said the paper tests are expensive.
Yeah.
The online tests, how much do you purchase them per administration, or how does that work?
So I'm gonna let Don take this question.
And I believe, didn't I initiated an account for you some time ago, right, Amy? So you have a DRC account. And so up to this point, the state has used state leadership funds to purchase TABE administrations. And the most recent purchase was December 22. And we bought 6,001 administrations because that's where the price break was. And at that point, when we buy 6,001, they're $3 per subtest.
Oh, wow.
Okay, so does our program pay for those?
No, so you have access.
Okay.
And then you draw down from this state leadership funded pool.
Okay.
Every time you administer a pre-test or a post-test.
Okay.
We don't pay for locators. We don't. The practice tests don't cost either. It's just the official subtests.
Okay.
And then of course it generates and I'm sure I trust we'll either look at that next time or the following week where we look at the score report with the diagnostics and partial mastery, full mastery, etc.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And about the locator test, Becky.
Yeah.
We of course serve ESL students, so we're not going to give them math. we don't need to give any of that.
Right.
If we would give just the reading, I mean, the locator, does that include all subtests, or can I
you can set it up so that you're giving just and when I showed you, trying to see if I still have my window open. I don't think I do. I'll log back in though.
And I'm curious, as Becky navigates that, I'm curious to hear if she generally, or if you two TABE language versus reading and level E versus level M as a common default as we transition students from ESL to ABE.
We give them the locator when we give them their initial test. But when we set up our test sessions, get this to go, we specifically do some, just at the 11s, because I would think it'll load a little faster. We specifically do some that they're called reading only and language only and math only. So let me scroll through and find, it's probably really small. So like there's our complete battery. That would be like everything plus all the locators. But like here's language only. And when you look at that test session, oh, I should have gone into the M. Let me show you the M, because then I can open it up and I know I don't have student information in there. The 12. Or maybe I do. All right. Kim, stop recording, would you? Just so I don't, if I open this up and there's student names in here.